This is your news update for January 11th, 2026. Today, we're breaking down the crisis that has pushed Iran to a tipping point. We're talking about a nationwide uprising, one that was born from sheer economic desperation and has now spiraled into one of the most significant challenges to the Islamic Republic since its founding. It all escalated in early January. The digital world, once a tool for protesters to organize, was flipped and used as a weapon against them. As demonstrations just swelled across the nation, the state literally pulled the plug. On January 8th, internet and telephone lines were just severed, plunging the entire country into an information black hole. And in that silence, the violence just exploded. Under the cover of this digital blackout, reports started to emerge of a truly brutal crackdown. Now, opposition media sources are estimating that over 2,000 protesters were killed in just a 48-hour period, right around January 9th and 10th. It's a staggering figure, and it really underscores the intensity of the state's response. So you have to ask, how did it come to this? An economic collapse that leads to a political rebellion? It's a huge deal. To really understand the events we're seeing right now, we have to go back to what lit the fuse for this entire movement in the first place. It really all starts with the economy. For months, these long-simmering issues had been boiling over, and by the end of 2025, they just erupted. It became a full-blown crisis that made everyday life simply unsustainable for millions of Iranians. Look at this number. This really shows you the scale of the currency's freefall. By late December 2025, the Iranian rial had plunged to a record low, trading at over 1.4 million to a single US dollar. Now, for ordinary people, this wasn't just some headline. It meant their life savings were evaporating and their salaries were basically worthless.
And the impact in the real world? Absolutely devastating. While overall inflation hit a staggering 42.2% in December, look at food prices. They soared by 72%. You're talking about hyperinflation hitting the most essential goods. It put basic things like food out of reach and pushed a desperate population right out onto the streets.
This economic crisis didn't just happen because of one thing. It was a perfect storm. The reimposition of U.S. sanctions back in 2018 choked off oil revenue. Then, in September 2025, you had the UN snapback sanctions, which brought back all the old international sanctions, adding another layer of pressure. And all of that was on top of domestic issues. Reports point to government mismanagement, chronic deficits, and of course, the economic shock from the 2025 war with Israel as key factors in this meltdown. So this economic desperation was the spark. But what began as a protest by a specific group, well, it didn't stay that way for long. The grievances were just so deep and so widespread that the movement quickly transformed into something much, much larger. Just look at this timeline. It shows the incredible speed of how this all escalated. It kicked off in late December with bazaar merchants in Tehran, the historic heart of Iranian commerce, closing up their shops. But by early January, students had joined in, and the movement just exploded across the country. A call for more demonstrations on January 8th by the exiled son of the last Shah, Reza Pahlavi, seemed to pour gasoline on the fire, leading to that massive escalation and the crackdown by January 10th. And as the protests got bigger, the message started to change. This chant, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran, became a really defining slogan. It signaled a clear shift, moving from just economic complaints to a nationalist rejection of the regime's foreign policy. Protesters were demanding that the government start prioritizing the needs of its own people. Another really key feature of this uprising is its structure, or maybe its lack of one. It's been described as broadly leaderless. This organic nature, with students and workers and merchants all participating without some central command, made it incredibly difficult for the government to suppress. You can't just cut the head off the snake if there isn't one. So, faced with this widespread and decentralized movement, the state responded with overwhelming force. They've been fighting this uprising on two fronts, in the streets and in the digital sphere. This really lays out the two sides of the confrontation as it's been described in multiple reports. On one side, you have this diverse, leaderless movement using protests and strikes. And on the other, you have the state deploying the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its Baji militia, a volunteer paramilitary force. Their response has been lethal force, mass arrests, and, crucially, these information blackouts. Cutting off the internet was a very calculated, two-pronged strategy. First, it was designed to cripple the protesters' ability to organize and share information. And at the same time, it was meant to hide the escalating violence of the crackdown from the rest of the world.
And even before the worst of the reported violence, the scale of the state's reaction was immense. According to the human rights group HRANA, by January 9th, over 2,300 protesters had already been arrested. This highlights a clear strategy of just mass detention to try and stamp out the dissent.
So, where does this leave Iran? Well, as we're speaking now, the country is locked in this high-stakes standoff, and the outcome is anything but certain. So, let's just quickly summarize the key takeaways. First, an economic collapse was the trigger. Second, the protests very quickly turned into a political uprising that's demanding regime change. Third, this movement is widespread, it's leaderless, and it involves a whole mix of social groups. Fourth, the state has responded with lethal force and a complete information blackout. And finally, all of this represents what many analysts are calling the most serious internal challenge to the regime since its founding back in 1979. Ultimately, the situation remains incredibly volatile. What we're seeing is a defiant population that feels it has nothing left to lose, confronting an entrenched regime that's determined to hold on to power at any cost. The future of Iran is being contested, street by street, and it is truly hanging in the balance. Another news summary will be provided in 24 hours. If you found this explainer valuable, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into complex topics.